Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host, Kira Young, and you've reached me on People's Internet Radio. It's April 4th, 2015 over here on the East Coast of America, and over in the UK and Ireland, it's midnight, so it's already the 5th. I have some great guests tonight that are back for more fun and mischief. My first guest is from spyculture.com. Welcome to The Bridge, Tom Secker.
Hey Kira, it's great to be back, and I'm really looking forward to what we're talking about tonight, because this promises to be another really fun but also very interesting conversation.
I'm looking forward to it as well. And my next guest is from Porkins Policy Review. Welcome to The Bridge, Pearse Redmond.
Hi Kira, thank you for having me on again.
You bet. I'm glad you're back. So, tonight we're going to start with Tom. You had a few things to say about the current climate of the alternative media and why it's like that. Why it's like it is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we were pondering over this question of cults. We've been talking about it quite a lot I suppose, since the turn of the year and possibly even before that. But the question of why is there so many of these sorts of organizations in the alt media, in the truth movement? And, I mean, my answer to this kind of has two different parts. The first bit is, why are people on the internet? And the second bit is, what does the internet do to people? And because, to my mind, most of the people who are on the internet who are actively looking for something, they're actively looking for new websites and new YouTube channels to watch and whatever, it's because they've, to some extent, rejected mainstream society. And so they're looking for something to kind of replace that with. And obviously the internet offers them an enormous range of possibilities of things that they could possibly replace that with. The other part of this is, what does the internet do? Because, I mean, I've been online in one form or another for, I think, more than half of my life. And certainly, as soon as broadband became available in my area, we got it. So I've used the internet an awful lot in lots of different forms, in lots of different ways. And just looking at the ease with which people, become desensitized in their conversations with others, and the way in which people communicate with others and deal with others and relate to others on the internet is very different to how it is face-to-face. It's a lot more blunt. It's a lot easier to... It's basically a lot easier to do anything bad. It's a lot easier to inflame someone. It's a lot easier to insult people. It's a lot easier to offend and turn things into a petty argument. It's a lot easier to manipulate and deceive people than it is in, real face-to-face conversation. Well, not that conversation on the internet isn't real, but, it's real in a different way. And so I think the question of why are there so many cults in this thing, on the internet broadly, but particularly in the whole kind of truth movement area, is sort of answered by those two things. It's a combination of, what are people looking for? They're looking for the sorts of things that cults pretend they offer you. And what does the internet do to people? It actually makes them primed for this sort of thing and this sort of manipulation that cults enact on people in order to recruit them. It's actually much, much easier. I mean, Facebook is a it's a cultist's recruiting ground, dream come true, I think. So that's my kind of basic answer to it. But Pearse, I know you've got some thoughts on this as well.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess to kind of reiterate what you were saying, just that it's a great breeding ground. But I think in terms of the alternative media, a lot of people are looking for answers. They're looking for the truth, quote, the truth. And cults have always played up on that idea. And I'm sure, Kira, all of your listeners have had that sort of waking up moment where I don't know, you find some piece of information about something like 9/11, and suddenly the curtain is pulled back, and you see what's really going on. And cults play up a lot of that secret knowledge that, by entering into this, you will understand how the world really works, and you'll understand the sort of evil forces that are at play. And only through being in this cult will you truly be awake. And obviously, cults are controlling your mind, controlling everything, every aspect about your life. But when you're indoctrinated, when you're under a guru or a cult leader's control, you don't really see that. So it's a great breeding ground for all of this. And I think that cults also have played up on that and have at least understood the power of controlling the alternative media or certain aspects of it, because there's this great recruiting ground for cults within the alt media. And there's lots of little historical things that we can point to that sort of expand upon that. But yeah, that's my sort of basic ideas about why they're involved in the alternative media.
Yeah, well, I've often thought about if Facebook isn't one big PSYOP experiment to see what works and what doesn't, to plan for the unplannable type of things, to try to come up with an algorithm, because that explains the way people react to various things, because they do work with them to group people together. They work with algorithms so that people find each other who are like-minded. So I've often thought about that.
Well, you've got to wonder the answer to the question, why do I get these things suggested to me? Because I'm not someone who, watches Alex Jones on YouTube, but I keep getting Alex Jones suggested to me. I don't watch Russell Brand, but I keep getting Russell Brand suggested to me. Similar kind of thing on Facebook. There's sorts of pages that it says, oh, you might be interested in this. And it's like, this hasn't got anything really to do with, or only in the most tangential way. And part of that is, promotional stuff. But part of that, I think, is some kind of algorithm that says, let's test out. Is this sort of person interested in this? Will they click like on this page, and will they start following it or not? And I think either way, you're giving them data that is then useful to them. And that's the sad thing. You can't even just say, sod off, I'm not interested in that, without, telling them something about yourself. Pearse, you're not even on Facebook. You've done the sensible thing and,
Well, yeah, I'm not, I thank God I'm not on Facebook, but I have the same problem on YouTube. I constantly am getting just people that I, would never give the time of day to, that are being recommended to me over and over again. I wonder if there isn't an algorithm that they think is working, and I wonder if they're not just sort of pushing that, like, well, whatever, this person is bound to click on this video at some point, and then maybe this will get them interested in this. And again, sort of going back to the, Facebook is great in terms of grouping people together, and then great in destroying these groups. So I think that's another, that doesn't even have to necessarily do with cults, but you can get people, grouped together politically. There are, political cults out there. Mm-hmm. And you can get everybody grouped together, and then all it takes is one or two people to be planted into that group, whether it be a message board or a Facebook group or, anything, Twitter, whatever, what have you, and slowly manipulate people, get people to turn against one another, to derail something completely. It doesn't have to necessarily be like an evil group. It can be something real. It starts as real, and then it gets completely destroyed from the inside out. So yeah, and that's that is part of one reason why I'm not on Facebook, and the other is just I hate Facebook.
It's a lot of work. It is. So, it's a balance. It's a great resource and tool, but it easily sucks you into more than what you really need to be doing in it. So,
particularly with the likes of Jan Irvin out there.
Oh God, yes. Yeah. Everybody's an agent. Everybody's a shill. Wow.
And an apologist for the Bolsheviks. But,
Right.
Don't know quite how he got there, but that's
hey,
what he says.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's that. And I've noticed this weird thing with trolls lately is that they don't. Their latest thing is be nice and insist that you're being nice, but be insulting at the same time. And then say that it's just your opinion and you have the right to it, and then complain about the people that block you because you use your right to insult them, but call it a critique. And that's the thing, is that people don't even actually realize the difference between a real critique and just, like you say in the UK, slagging someone off. That's not really the same thing, and it doesn't deserve the same amount of respect as someone like Thomas Sheridan, who takes the time to critique the truth movement and give this powerful presentation like he did on Wednesday night about what went wrong, and use the archetype of the orc to really say something very powerful about how we could move on from the situation we find ourselves in. And then you just get people that are like, well, he blocked me because I had an opinion. It's like, no, you were an asshole. Just face that, and then you can move forward. But
you know what I mean. It's a lot of this is because of the technology itself. Because all of this is just words coming at you from the ether. You can just treat a sincere, reasoned, sensible critique in the same way as you would treat someone just slagging you off. You can just respond to it in the same way if you want to, because there's no consequence to you really doing that. I mean, the worst thing that happens is, someone blocks you on Facebook. I mean, so what? So like I say, it's not like in the real world where you wouldn't deal with people like that. You wouldn't deal with people in the same way. You wouldn't dare talk to people like that, or I imagine most of these trolls wouldn't. But because the technology allows them to just see it as a name next to some words saying something, then
right.
You're completely alienated from it. The actual content of those words and the fact that that's a real person, or most of the time at least, it's a real person on the other end of it, doesn't matter. You're actually just sort of arguing with some words in a box on a page rather than arguing with a real person. So the experience, you know what I mean? Just the experience is so different.
Well,
bringing it back.
Go ahead.
Bringing it back for a second to cults and the internet, and it's just writing words. I think that's why there are more and more cults that are operating on the internet and using things like Facebook, because you are more likely to be like, oh, well, what the hell? It's just, they don't really know who I am. It's not my real picture up on Facebook or whatever social media that I'm using, or just typing. They can't really jump through the screen and attack me. So yeah, sure, I'll give it a whirl. And then next thing you know, suddenly you're giving money to this person. You're spending all of your time on the internet, on these message boards. Your life becomes a whole series of different decisions, and you start using phrases that they're all applying. So it's very, that it's so much easier than having to have someone walking down the street and to, ask, oh, hey, have you heard about Scientology? Would you like a free personality test? Whereas now it's very easy to just sort of get someone interested through the internet. And I think a lot of time you get people have this idea, oh, I would never fall for a cult. So they'll and they're much more willing to look at it if it's on the internet, because again, you don't have to go into a Scientology center, put your hands on the e-meter anymore. You can do a lot of this through the internet. So it makes it much easier to get people to look. And like I said, people have this idea, oh, I would never get involved in a cult. And you start, going to certain sites on the internet, and the next thing you know, you're preaching about whatever to your friends, and you don't even realize that you're in a cult or in a pseudo cult. And there's a lot of those out there, and that's really easy for people to fall into, especially these ones that are supposedly based around political ideologies.
Like,
well,
for
sure.
instance, give us a few examples of the political ones, if you don't mind.
Oh, well, I mean, just unfortunately, so much of the libertarian movement has been co-opted by the more extreme people within that. And, you know, I think that's a big one, and that's one that I feel more comfortable talking about, only because I very much subscribed to a lot of libertarian thinking. I was somewhat involved in the liberty movement here in New York to a degree, and I spent a lot of time looking into it and reading about it and watching videos and all those sort of things. And there's a lot of people within that have this sort of guru-like mentality, and they're able to take a political ideology, which, if you kind of strip it down, is good, but you can add in a lot of dogma within that, where then you get people spouting nonsense and claiming that everyone that doesn't believe them is an irrational statist that wants to kill you. But that's the flip side is, you know, there's a lot of Marxist crap out there, a lot of people on the left that, you know, preach the same sort of complete, utter bullshit, and they spew it out over and over again. But definitely, I think that the liberty movement is prime for that, because you got a lot of you know, angry young white guys like myself. Or I'm not angry, but, you know, I
maybe
thought
a
I
little
was,
bit,
maybe.
and, maybe a wee bit.
You know, it's really easy. It's really easy to convince an angry young white guy that, you know, if only we destroyed the state and implemented this really narrow-minded version of anarchy or anarchism, that suddenly, oh God, we would live in this wonderful utopia where we'd all, you know, trade everything with gold and bitcoins, and there'd be no laws, but that would be great because no one would hurt each other, you know, and we'd have conflict resolution centers set up everywhere, and all of this sort of, you know, crap that, and we'd only involve in involuntary interactions, and it's like, okay, maybe. You know, but again, utopian ideas, that's so cult-like, and anyone that sort of preaches that kind of crap is dangerous in my book.
Well, and I mean, like you said, Pearse, there is the same kind of thing going on the left with the Marxists, because you have, or the, not just with Marxists, but with people who, probably quite a lot of people who think that they're Marxists when they're actually something a bit different, like the Zeitgeist movement, which you know. And what's come out of that, an awful lot of those people have now joined Anonymous, which is similarly a kind of, you know, pseudo-leftist but ultimately transhumanist cult. It's about surrendering your identity to a much bigger, broader, wider idea. With Zeitgeist, it was this utopian technocratic socialism whereby everything would be determined by some centralized computer, and that would determine how much resources everyone got, and, you know, where everyone would work and for how long, and blah 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 blah. And there, it's it's the same kind of mentality. It's this notion of we have this grand utopian vision for where humanity could get to and could be, and so it doesn't matter that all of the existing history and all of the existing political struggles indicate that getting to that point is going to be rather difficult. And so whenever you ask these people, well, what does this look like in terms of practical reality? The practical reality is usually quite horrible, whether it's on the left or the right. It's usually some form of, you know, usually scapegoating a certain group of people and either trying to destroy them or just completely make them subservient to the system in some way in order to liberate the rest of us. That's usually the kind of historical narrative that you get. It's a narrative of liberation. And whether that's, you know, the, if you like, more right-wing free market anarchism that is quite popular, or whether it's the more leftist technocratic overcoming of the state, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. The practical steps that you'd have to go to get to those utopias, or so-called utopias, are quite terrible. And that's the one of the main problems with the cultist mentality is that when they've fallen in love with a certain idea or a certain leader, the actual real-world consequences of what that person is proposing or what that ideology implies or what that utopia necessitates doesn't matter to them anymore, because it's the dream that they're addicted to. So the practical reality, like I say, this is again why the internet is so effective at doing these things, is because it divorces you from the practical reality. And it means that you can go on the internet and dream about what the world could look like and what humanity could behave like. And the notion of actually having to embrace the real world struggles and actually figure out some real practical solutions to some of this, at least. It's a form of escapism. I suppose that's what I'm driving at. And cults love people who are looking to escape from something.
And you still get your dopamine high, right? You can go on the internet and get your dopamine high, but then when somebody interrupts your dopamine high with a little bit of, reality, then you can get real bitchy and, because somebody messed up your rush.
You're killing my utopian party with your goddamn reality, Kira. Yeah. What are you playing at? How dare you? How dare you interrupt my fantasizing? No.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have anything wrong with fantasizing, but,
No, of course not. But it's
you
like, be aware that that's what you're doing.
Right.
Just embrace that it's a fantasy and, okay, that's fine. Great, embrace your imagination, but realise that that's what it is, and don't think that this is a real-world political discussion that you're engaging in, because it just isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm ranting, Pearse. Do you want to pick up on
that? Oh, no. I mean, that's all... Yeah, of course. Whenever you get into that mindset where, like you were saying, if you bring in reality or any sort of questioning of that, and you have this knee-jerk, near-violent reaction to it, you really have to take a step back, because at that point you've really drunk a lot of the Kool-Aid, and you're so willing to believe in this crazy utopia that you will go along with things that otherwise you would never be associated with. And that's like a lot in this sections of the liberty movement. That's when you get this sort of coded racism that pops up over and over again, where you get people that are not racist or they're not bad people, but they're manipulated in such a way that they feel that if they disagree, or they feel that, well, if I'm agreeing with the so-called leftist socialist propagandists, that's anti-liberty. So let me support the police murdering some black kid. And that might sound like a leap, but that comes up over and over again, and that's like a really worrying trend. And again, that's like destroying their little utopia. So they have to scurry back into their hole and kind of put up all of these barriers around them so that they can somehow justify whatever it is that they're doing. Because, and again, you're just a statist. That's a great, you could just say that about anything, and okay, I guess the conversation is over.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I'm a statist, and this is not to say I'm a statist at all. No, but but that's What about Alex Jones? I mean, do you think that the Alex Jones land acts like a cult? The people who follow Alex Jones?
I think he's not so much of a cult in the most literal sense of it, but because I think he's more obsessed with just, I don't know, everyone talking about him. I think he's more like a celebrity. That's what he's really become. He's more obsessed with his own image and less so with anything else. It's the Alex Jones show. It's not whatever. So I think he's more obsessed with that. I think he's just more obsessed with being relevant, or at least being talked about. And he could probably kind of care less about many of his detractors, because he doesn't care all that much. And I wouldn't either if I was him, because I'm making money hand over fist through the television show, through the internet, through the crap that he sells on his website, all that. So who really cares? Whereas there are other people there are people that he has on his show that are definitely cult leaders.
Oh,
but
sure.
I'm not sure if Alex Jones would necessarily. But I mean, definitely people follow him like he's like the fucking Messiah. But
well, what I was going to say is it's more like a vague religious movement than it is like a cult, because there's no clear doctrine, is there? What is it that you actually believe in as an Alex
Hating
Jones
the government and that they're evil. And I mean, that's the clear doctrine there. The government's evil.
Yeah.
Everything they do is evil.
Yeah, for sure, I get that. And certainly hatred and fear is a big part of it.
Yeah.
But like I say, that's more of a kind of general mentality than a real sort of belief system that you could identify with and try and explain to someone else as a set of beliefs. Unlike, for example, Scientology or anarcho-capitalism or whatever. So with Alex Jones, it is a bit more wishy-washy, because he tries to appeal to all sorts of people. You know, he'll have people from the Christian right on, and they'll be talking about how, you know, evil spirits control the stock market, and he'll endorse it, and he'll say, yeah, you're absolutely right. This was all prophesied in the Bible, blah blah blah. And then he'll have some sort of more vague, new agey person on who's talking about, you know, the vibration levels or some shit, and he'll go, oh yeah, absolutely, that's where we need to go. Yeah, we need to, you know, embrace the new kind of, direction with these things. And so it really is pretty vague as to what on earth you're supposed to believe in listening to this show, except, like I say, just sort of fear and anger and believing in Alex Jones. So it's not really a cult in the classic sense, because, as I say, they're not sort of... I suppose it appeals to people in the same way as a cult does. I think that's certainly true. But I wouldn't necessarily consider them a cult per se. I suppose some of the really hardcore people, you could consider that, you know, the people who for some reason are still listening to Alex Jones after, 15, 20 years of this crap. You probably you could consider them maybe a cult, perhaps. I mean, Pearse, would you?
I think those kind of people, it's cult-like. That, you'll meet a lot of people on the internet or even in real life, even people that are by no stretch of the imagination a truther or into the alternative media, that listen to Alex Jones every once in a while and will spout some sort of buzzwords that he says or some sort of idea. So you do meet, there's a lot of people out there, and certainly whoever are these like hardcore people that have sat through 15 years of him screaming at the top of his lungs and crying on the air and all sorts of the other weird manipulative behavior that he engages in. I think they are definitely in a cult mentality where this man can do no wrong. He can contradict himself every other day and still somehow get around it. He can have veritable CIA agents on his show talking about aliens or who, the Zionists behind name a topic, and people will just, oh yeah, right, oh, it's okay, that's okay, yeah, Alex knows what he's doing. He knows how to, he said he's got the research on, he's got the documents. I love that, he's always saying, well, we've got the documents on blah, blah, blah. And, okay, sure, whatever, Alex, nothing to see here, move along, folks. So those people are certainly in a some sort of cult-like grip with him. But I don't know, even so, I think those people just want to be led by somebody. And again, that is a cult-like behavior. But I personally don't think he's intellectually capable of having a cult. I think if it wasn't for the people behind the scenes promoting him and pushing him and funding him, he wouldn't be where he is today. I think he would have always had he would have had appeal for sure, but there's nothing new about him. And that's it. And this is, there's varying degrees. It's like people like Glenn Beck would have always been famous, but when people make such a big deal about his influence, it's sort of like, well, whatever. I mean, he would have always had a group out there. There's nothing new about him. People like that have always existed, but it's only when certain individuals decide, oh, okay, let's put a little bit of money behind this guy. Let's see where it goes. But like I said, I don't think Alex Jones is intellectually capable of running a cult. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, here's one. could we distinguish between the kind of classic form of a cult, such as Scientology or Jonestown or whatever, and a cult of personality? Because I certainly think there is that around InfoWars and around Alex Jones, that he has this thing where people are almost drawn to his, the energy that he puts into his theatre itself. This man is a showman. He's a circus act. That's what he is. He's a clown, really. So people are very much drawn to that. The fact that he seems to care about this so much, and obviously he doesn't because he's a cynical moneymaker. But the fact that he gets so worked up about this and makes these sort of outrageous predictions, and everything's always imminent collapse and everything. There is a certain attraction to that, in the same way as. Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good parallel, but there isn't. I can't really think of a good parallel to Alex Jones. He is a bit of a. He does the thing that Alex Jones does. You're right, is something that people have been doing for a long, long time, but he does do it pretty well. I would say he probably does it better than anyone else is currently doing it. But you know what I mean? That it's more about the drawing to the man and his energy himself than it is about anything that he says. Because, like you say, what he says seems to contradict everything else he says anyway. So. The precise content doesn't matter.
It's like a preacher, like a preacher, but
a televangelist or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So would you say televangelism is a cult? Well, not quite, but again, it's a sort of cult of personality. It's that you've got this very excited, very passionate person on the TV demanding that you do something, usually give them your money. So it's easy for people to then pick up the phone and maybe they regret it the following day and think, I'm never going to do that again. And hopefully most of them do, but the sad truth is quite a lot of them don't. It's quite easy to inspire people to do something right here, right now, without it necessarily being a cult, per se, if you're with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'd fit Alex Jones in, yeah.
Okay. Well, besides Alex Jones, I mean, he's teamed up with that ex-wrestler governor dude. I forget his... What's the guy's
Jesse
name?
Ventura?
Yes, and I've watched some of the stuff that they've done together, and they certainly play fast and loose with the facts, and use a lot of really dramatic music to get your blood pumping and stuff like. It's just fear porn, really. I mean, it's all it is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this guy is a former professional wrestler. Let's not forget.
Right.
That's you watch something like that, and then you watch something like Alex Jones, and you think these production values are awfully similar.
Very much.
The theatrical techniques, and the good guys and the bad guys, and just the whole mentality of it is virtually identical. So it's no. I'm just saying. I suppose it's no surprise to see Jesse Ventura and Alex Jones buddying up a bit. They are quite similar men in a lot of ways.
Do you think
and
that
both of them would buddy up to anybody that would put a fucking camera in front of them? So
that too, yes, particularly that. Well, and like with so many of these sorts of relationships, and obviously you see this in the mainstream and the alt media, but you're starting to see increasingly crossover where because you're both turning up with an audience and you're both turning up with a camera, it just becomes some mutual promotion exercise. Like, for example, Piers Morgan and Alex Jones. Mm-hmm. They both won out of that. They both appealed to their own audiences in a massive way and probably, attracted some kind of interest, at least from the other side, because people like watching things that they disagree with and then going online and talking about how much they disagree with them. So, that whole thing, in the midst of all of that, all of those gun rampage incidents that America had in 2012 that didn't seem to really then go anywhere. It all seemed to quieten down after that. But you know what I mean, right? In the midst of that, you had that big Piers Morgan, Alex Jones ding-dong, and it was total theatre. It was like professional wrestling. It was fucking absurd. And both of them were talking complete bullshit. That's the thing. It was like neither one of those had the slightest clue about a real discussion about gun rights and where America is going in terms of all of these, the issue of private gun ownership versus state monopoly on violence and so forth. Neither one of them have the slightest thing to actually say about that in a meaningful way, but they managed to get this huge promotional exercise out of it, and I think they both actually did rather well. You know what I mean?
Oh, I'm sure they were both afterwards, patting each other on the back. I don't think they really dislike each other. I mean, like you said, they both got what they wanted out of it, and yeah, whatever, I mean, that's fine. And again, I don't know, Alex Jones going on a mainstream news channel, Mr. Alternative, and he also picks this, skeevy, nasty, slimy, phone hacking dickhead to go on to. It's just encapsulates he has no qualms about any of this. He doesn't give a shit. Whoever will give him a platform, that's fine.
You said it right there. Whoever will give you a platform. So maybe that's the problem on a bigger scale with the alternative media, is that people don't want any part of their platform being taken from them. So if they see that maybe one area of their platform is, for instance, going Nazi, there's silence, or just continuing the friendship kind of thing, or just not noticing it, just whatever, it's all good kind of attitude. Is that really
well? Or even I see quite a lot of, particularly with InfoWars recent output and what's his name, Watson's recent output, a lot of direct appeals to that crowd. That they clearly know that crowd is there, and they clearly know that's a growing part of their audience, or part of their audience is now turning in that direction. And I don't think they give a damn. I think they're cynically just exploiting it and playing up to it where necessary, while ironically also promoting that terrible, terrible Nicki Minaj music video, which totally glorified Nazism. And so, you have Alex Jones going on his show talking about how Nicki Minaj is some sort of truther, and that she's, anti-authoritarianism and so on. And you just...
Right.
Trying to kid. So there again, there's no values. There is no core values. There's no core ideas. There's no real belief system at all. There is just a bunch of appeals, mostly emotional, but some more kind of ideologically based, in order to try and draw people in and try to appeal to as many people as possible without pissing anyone off. So like you say, they will never turn around and actually criticize their audience for promoting neo-Nazism. Of course they won't, because then those people will leave, or might leave, and they're terrified of that. And that's one of the main problems with the old media, is that in the absence of any true influence, all they can really go for is YouTube hits. That's how they measure their success, or how so many people in the old media measures their success. But that means you're just at the beck and call of however many thousand idiots there are out there. It really is. It's like being a professional politician. Why bother? You're just at the beck and call of a bunch of people who aren't worthy of your time. So rather than, like I say, just having, a bunch of ideas or mentalities or something that you really want to just explain and project onto the world and see if there's people out there who agree with you or not. If you embrace it in that way, you don't really care about how many hundreds or thousands of people are listening. You care about just who is listening, if you like. And what is their response, and what have they got to say to you about the things that you've said? Because that's the real fun thing about podcasting, is when you get emails from people that actually tell you things that you wouldn't have thought of yourself. And I'm sure that's not why Alex Jones does this at all.
Right.
We are fundamentally doing something quite different to him. Even if we may be using theoretically the same technology and the same kind of mechanism, we are fundamentally doing something different. And I suppose, just to get back to where we started with this, so even though the internet does encourage this sort of behaviour and these sorts of organisations and things to sprout up, that doesn't mean that's all it's capable of. It is capable of being used in lots of other ways. That's kind of the good news, if you like.
Right. Well, I wanted to get a little bit into some of the coded language that's used in the game. So the game being we're playing for a certain audience, but we don't want to piss off another one that might like us too. You know, what do you think, Pearse, about the coded language that you've seen in your travels?
Oh yeah, that's well, I think, I mean, to beat up on someone again, people like Stefan Molyneux, who runs Free Domain Radio, sometimes he's not even really using coded language, but he's able to frame arguments, particularly things like Ferguson and what happened to Trayvon Martin and some of the other, when it was sort of, in vogue everywhere for the news to suddenly realize that a lot of young black men were being killed by police. He will frame the argument in a way where he basically propagates the myth that all young black men smoke weed, are in gangs, are violent, are aggressive. He'll blame them for being horrible to women when half of his show is spent deriding all women as bitches and whatnot. But yeah, he uses a lot of weird coded stuff. He'll say ghetto youth a lot, and that's definitely his code word for the N word or whatever. Or to just he wants to really kind of pound it into your head. Oh, this isn't a black man. This is a ghetto black man. So that's somehow worse. That's more extreme or whatnot. But and he is able to frame these arguments in such a way that he always comes out on the side of the police, on the side of the state, the one using force, no matter what the situation is. And that's part of this sort of broader coded ideology whereby, and I know you've talked about this, Kira, that a lot of people, the so-called anarchists, seem to have, all these problems with, like social welfare, but they don't seem to have as big a problem with the police or with the military. Everybody wants to get rid of FEMA, but nobody seems to be like, oh, maybe we should get rid of the CIA. So I think that's a lot of what Molyneux kind of pushes, is that this, it's not the welfare state is awful in many ways, and indeed I think a lot of it is designed to keep people poor, to keep people stuck. Sure. And there's a lot of other issues, but it's a much bigger picture. But when you're able to basically say that, oh, Social Security is evil, but the police killing some black kid because this kid allegedly did this and this, or, oh, well, he smoked weed and got into a fight at school, so that means that it's okay for some random citizen to go and kill him and then get off on it. That's a dangerous ideology, and I think that's this ideology that is promoted a lot in the libertarian movement, that the state is evil except for these sort of aggressive... there's so much authoritarianism within the libertarian movement, and they seem to ironically side on the side of authority over and over again. And this is a complete perversion of what libertarians, real libertarians espouse. But unfortunately, that's become part of the discussion, and some of that is coded, and some of it is not coded. But I don't know. I'm rambling now.
Well, it always surprises me when I hear him call himself an anarchist, because it's like, really? I've heard nothing that really has anything to do with that. I've heard a lot of misogyny, a lot of, all of the world's problems are due to single mothers. All of them. Like every single one is due to single mothers. That's all I hear. That's all I hear from him. But go ahead, Tom.
Well, I mean, that's a really good example because Molyneux, broadly speaking, appeals to the right wing, you might say. He appeals to people like in the American Liberty Movement and the old American Conservative Movement. And there is this worrying slip in those movements from their traditional starting points, which were pretty good, into this essentially far-right authoritarianism, which is supposed to be the opposite of what they believe in, but there is an awful lot of slippage between one of those, from one to the other. And Molyneux plays on this all the time. But what he also does is he appeals bizarrely to the same kind of technocratic Marxist or leftist people that we were talking about earlier, because he uses a lot of this kind of sociological language where he'll talk about single-parent families and substance abuse. You know what I mean? It's technocratic euphemisms rather than just saying a guy who smoked a joint. I mean, just live in the real world. Why not? But no, again, it's about escaping from the real world and about framing the real world in a rhetorical way that leads to a certain conclusion. And so because you're talking about a single-parent family, then, that sounds like some kind of a technocratic anomaly of in our society, rather than, it just means it's a family with one parent. What's the big mystery here? What's the big problem here? What's the big kind of... why does that need this sociological label attaching to it? Well, it's to turn it into a sociological phenomenon rather than a bunch of people, which is what it actually is. You know what I mean? But that's the last thing Molyneux ever wants you to think of other people as, is just a bunch of people. They're always either, they're statists, or they're taxpayers, or they're working for the government, in which case they might as well just be stealing all of your money and clubbing you over the head, or they're members of our organisation, our online community. And of course you can't spell online community without the letters in cult. So, either they're one or the other. They're never just a bunch of people who are complex and have many different facets to them. They're always a, ghetto youth substance abuser who, was threatening towards the police. And you just think, well, of course, if you frame it in that way, of course people are going to buy into this notion that, actually, maybe there was something good about this. Maybe this was some dangerous person who was actually threatening to society. Because he's managed to convince people that anyone who behaves in any kind of remotely so-called threatening way is as dangerous as someone clubbing you over the head and raping you or stealing all your money or killing you. And that there is no grade of, moral perspective, if you like. Because it's not like being a young black kid in a street gang is a particularly good thing for people to be doing. None of us are saying that. None of us are sort of saying this is what these kids should be doing with their lives. But what we are all saying is there is no earthly reason why that should be a justification for the police killing them. And yet in the Molyneux cult, it somehow becomes that, because it's all phrased in this and, encapsulated in this language, whereby it's not just some poor black kid. It's a violent, or a kid with a history of violence and substance abuse. And so that turns him into a phenomenon rather than a person. And so it's a dangerous phenomenon that needed to be dealt with rather than a person who was killed. Right. Yeah, it's all about, again, divorcing people from reality. And the internet is the perfect mechanism to do that.
Mm-hmm. And those, drug addicted ghetto children that were sacred probably when they were fetuses and deserving of a chance to live, because otherwise an evil woman would she's damned if she does and damned if she doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. She's evil if she terminates her pregnancy, and she's evil if she has the kid because she's a drag on the state. So there's so it's a lose-lose because you're female and you're evil, just straight off the bat.
Well, and what's the implication of this? The implication is women shouldn't get pregnant. That pregnancy should be something that is, determined by whatever bizarre technocratic free market mechanism he is going to invent next. But it all starts to sound a bit like Brave New World. And this is something, again, that has bothered me for a long, long time about Molyneux and the sorts of things he espouses, is the covert transhumanism to the whole thing. That if all you're supposed to do, if the only interactions you're supposed to have with other people are voluntary, and because in the real world violence is always possible, I suppose, is one way of looking at it, the only place to escape from the violent real world, and the only realm that actually offers a violence-free chance at voluntary interaction, is the digital realm. So the obvious implication of this is actually that the way that human beings get beyond the world of violence and embrace freedom, as they define it, would be to replicate yourself digitally. And let's face it, Molyneux is extremely atheistic in the same way that, like, Richard Dawkins is.
Yep.
Very, very hostile towards old religions. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm quite hostile towards old religions most of the time, but not in that way. Not in the way that I'm saying people should, criminalistic or psychologically ill if they believe in any kind of religion. I certainly don't go down that route. But you sort of start piecing this whole thing together, and you think, well, what would their ideal society look like? It probably wouldn't look too far off the transhumanist dream of, everyone sort of living together forever in the digital world. Because of, like I say, that would be the ultimate escape from all the very real world problems of things like violence. And it's not like I'm in any way a fan of violence or people using violence, but again, it's just about being realistic. This is the world we've got. Some people are violent. Maybe a response to that needs to be a bit more mature and sensible than I'm part of some grand historical narrative and struggle whereby the forces of freedom are going to win out over the forces of evil or something. I mean, if you, like, again, it's escapism. It's just fleeing from the responsibility of real world problems into something where you have no real consequence for yourself, at least, and where it's like none of this really even matters, or you can claim it matters in a way that has nothing to do with the real world. So therefore, the fact that it has no real-world consequence, you can just say, oh, well, that doesn't, that's not what we're trying to do anyway. And that, it does leave you with the question, well, what is it that these people are trying to do? Because if you're fleeing from real-world politics, but claiming you're setting up an online political, philosophical community, presumably you are trying to have some kind of impact on the world. And so you start picking apart sort of Molyneux and his whole project, and you start wondering, well, what was the purpose of this? Because the stated purpose, it clearly isn't that. It just isn't. It's kind of so obvious from the mechanisms. So, again, I'm rambling.
Well, if we look at the overall goal of transhumanism, it's the removal of the mother. And so it would make sense that you would connect his philosophy with transhumanism, because he has a real issue with the mother, and he seems to want to remove the mother as well.
Mm. No, he certainly has a problem with mothers. He certainly seems to have just a sort of general problem with women. Molyneux does seem to have a bit of a problem relating to women, and I mean, Pearse, before I kind of launch into my kind of broader analysis of what the hell I think Molyneux might be, do you want to kind of put in your 2 cents here?
Well, yeah, I guess, we were just sort of talking before about this battle for utopia, and that's a dangerous concept that's in all cults and is a really powerful tool for control. So if you believe in this saving the world mentality, in this struggle against good and evil, where the good people are Molyneux's narrow-minded view of a narrow-minded political ideology, and evil is virtually everybody else, no matter who they are, then you can do things like what he advocates, defooing, which is when you just basically cut off all ties and connections with your family, and that seems like a great idea because they're evil. So that's a really powerful, tool of control. And that's what's dangerous about Molyneux. And before we were talking about this sort of coded racism and all those things, and that's like a lot of that has to do with like semantic theory, which was really popular among people like L. Ron Hubbard. And that by controlling words and phrases, that if you come up with new meanings for them, and if you alter them, that you can control everything. You can change reality around you by controlling what words mean. And that sounds kind of out there and crazy, but yeah, when you are able to, when you say ghetto youth, and suddenly this like rage boils up inside of you, or if you just say, mother, single mother. or Tom, you were saying, some of the other sort of phrases, sociological ideas that he uses, that has become, those are code words for people within the free domain community to get all up in arms about. And you can justify the most insane behavior towards other people because you've changed the semantics of what something means in one's own reality. So that's what really creeps me out about him, and the way that, I remember, a few years ago when I started watching some of his videos and watching them and sort of, disagreeing with them, but then thinking, oh, but, maybe he's right, or he knows more than I do, or, he sounds so smart and eloquent. And then a lot of the time too, and then it's information overload. There's so much information that he's throwing at you that it's very easy to reform someone's ideas and thoughts when you're just getting a shit ton of information thrown at you. Not everything is going to stick, but certain little aspects of that will creep into your mind over time. So, yeah, that's why I think he's really creepy. And I also just find him, just personally, he's rude and dismissive. He doesn't like. He's also like the classic hypocrite in so many things. Like, he complains constantly that intellectual property is evil, but will get people's YouTube accounts banned if they use his material to criticize him. It's fine to use his material as long as it's promoting him, but if you criticize it, I'm going to block your YouTube channel. I'm going to use the state to get whatever means, to control whatever it is you're saying. So that's very interesting, and that's his classic cult leader guru mentality, that he's allowed to break the rules because he's the philosopher king, who he knows all of the knowledge. So it's okay, for him to bend the rules a little bit. But if anyone else does it, they're shunned from the group. They've got to they've got to make up for this. They've got to donate more money to FDR or whatever he deems necessary. So that's what's dangerous about him, and I think that he uses this anarcho-capitalist mentality in order to really introduce his super dangerous ideas, and that is this idea of destroying the family, as Tom was saying, about ripping apart the family and creating this new digital family. And I don't really, I don't think his libertarianism is almost whatever to me, because it seems like that's not even that's not his ultimate goal. His ultimate goal is to, as he said, to, fix the world. That before him, parents were all evil and abusive to their children. So his messianic idea is that he is Plato or Aristotle, and that he's going to change everything through defooing and creating this brand new, voluntary only society. So that's what's really dangerous about him. Not so much. I mean, the libertarian stuff can be dangerous, but I think again, he also gives a really bad name to a lot of people in a movement that, by and large, don't necessarily agree with what he says. But it's very easy to lump all of them in because, again, he's totally willing to lend his name to a mainstream news article if they call him and ask him about, libertarianism. He will spout off a million different things, and suddenly then, that's what the liberty movement is all about. Whereas really, the terrifying thing is that he's really about this bizarre destruction of the family and this rebuilding of it. And of course, with him as the father figure at the center. Mm-hmm. He's the one determining, Kira, you should dress a certain way and you shouldn't wear makeup, and Tom, you should listen to this kind of music, and picking apart your personal life and somehow manipulating everything into your parents are evil, and only through defooing them and believing everything that I say as the guru and giving me money, you will somehow become free, and then we will help free everybody else. So that's what's really dangerous about what he's preaching.
Yeah, sure. I agree with basically all of that. Just to pick up on one particular contradiction here is that, like we say, he, broadly speaking, tries to appeal to the liberty and conservative movements in the US. That's where a lot of his audience base seems to be. And yet, a lot of those people are deeply, deeply into the idea of homeschooling, right? They're really opposed to the state public education system, and of course, why not? And all in favour, no problem with that at all. But yet homeschooling is fundamentally something that it doesn't have to be a family thing, but it's kind of dependent on some kind of family unit working, right? And yet these same people are listening to Stefan Molyneux tell them that, oh no, the family is the root of all evil. But if the family is the root of all evil, you're opening the door to the state in a massive way, in just the same way as in, the first generations of the Soviet Union. They would take young people from their families, and the state would bring them up in order to then turn them into KGB or GRU or whatever, special forces or something, because they would be so loyal to the state system because they had nowhere else to go. And I have to wonder, firstly, is there the potential for that whole thing that Molyneux is advocating to completely backfire in terms of actually generating the circumstances for a Soviet-style system? And also, just how much confusion and how much contradiction are people willing to tolerate in terms of what they believe? It just kind of bothers me. You know what I'm saying, Piers? And
it's apparently a massive amount they can put up with. I was recently talking about this on Aaron's show on Transistor Radio, and we talked a little bit about Molyneux and some other things. And I was totally I was talking about AA and the cult-like aspects of that and my own experiences within AA, and I was totally expecting lots of emails about that. And instead, it was these, the second I touched on Molyneux, that was the response. People commenting, people getting upset. Oh, you don't understand. You've been fed a lot of propaganda. He's not a racist. And all of this sort of shit. And it seems that there's a massive amount of hypocrisy that people are willing to put up with because he is this charismatic person that is able to appeal to some, large swaths of the alternative media, the liberty movement, the homeschooling movement. There's a lot of that in that he's able to appeal to. And so I think people are totally willing to put up with Molyneux's ridiculous shit. I mean, people that defend him for banning people's YouTube accounts because they stole his intellectual property, while at the same time they will go to, great lengths to say that it's fine to steal music on the internet because that doesn't exist as intellectual property. So, and that's the cult mentality where the guru can do it, but anyone else is evil for doing it.
Well, and that the guru can do no wrong.
Yeah.
That if the guru says it, then even if it contradicts everything that the guru has said, then
it's fine.
Yeah, It's like, with the Dalai Lama taking money from the CIA to give it to, people to kill Chinese communists. And then and then he says he's a pacifist and a Marxist. I mean, it's like, how much are you really willing to tolerate from these people before you just say they're completely full of shit? But, I mean, the thing with Molyneux is that he's potentially something a lot worse than just a guy who's full of shit. And he's even potentially a lot worse than just your average common or garden cult leader. Because, I mean, I've talked to both of you about this before, and it is something that, for a long time, I didn't want to talk about this, because I think the man might be seriously mentally unwell, and therefore it's not something I particularly want to do, is stick the boot into him in public. But because of the sheer dangerous potential, and even the dangerous reality of what he's done, it's kind of got to the point that it's unavoidable. Because, let's face it, two different people from Molyneux's inner circle have tried to kill themselves. One successfully. One person killed themselves, the other person didn't. And gladly seems to have actually recovered their life since then, because listening to interviews with him, he seems to actually be doing relatively well since he got out of the Molyneux cult. As indeed I would say to anyone who is remotely involved with the man or with his organisation, is to get the hell away from it. But there's sort of two possibilities here. Molyneux has this backstory that he has outlined in tremendous detail over many, many years of a very, very abusive single mother. This is, of course, where it all comes from. And if the stories that he's telling are true, then it sounds like his mother was a textbook psychopath. It sounds like she was just, a soulless, remorseless human being. And so, or not even a human being, perhaps. And so you've got to wonder, is it possible that the behaviors that he adopts of, his ease with saying things that contradict everything else, his ease of deception and psychological manipulation, his desire and ability to kind of pry into people's psychology, their mentalities, and try and implant ideas there and try and convince them, that this feeling you had was wrong or something. Whether all of those manipulations and those techniques, whether he actually learnt them from his psychopathic mother. Because one of the parallels that he likes, or one of the examples, the pop culture examples that he's brought up a number of times, is Tony Soprano. And I think that's quite apt, because you'd have a man whose mother was psychopathic, and who learns from that how to be a very, very effective gang leader. And that's, there are kind of similarities between the mafia and a cult. They are more of a sort of secret society, maybe, than a cult. But whatever, same sort of, area of the world, same sort of organization. So like I say, you have a man who learns how to become a very effective leader, how to manipulate people and push them in the right sort of direction that basically you can get them to do what you want. That's the bottom line. And he's learnt this, and is aping those behaviors as a kind of proto-psychopath. And that's why it's so effective. Mm. The other possibility, of course, is that all of that is bullshit, and that Molyneux himself is a psychopath, who has just invented this backstory. That's the other distinct possibility in my mind. And I'm honestly not sure which one it is, because whenever I don't watch his videos anymore, I just can't. But when I used to, I really did get this vibe of someone who's kind of missing something. And that could be, of course, the result of an incredibly abusive upbringing. Of course, he could be trapped in this state of emotional arrested development himself, where he struggles to relate to other people, and he genuinely believes that because his family was so terrible, that all families must be terrible, and that therefore everyone should get rid of their families, and everyone should embrace the substitute family of digital life. It is possible that does all derive from an abusive upbringing, but it's also possible that he's invented that, because it's the sort of story that a lot of people would identify with and believe in. And also, of course, the sort of story that no one would really want to turn around and accuse him of making up. Mm. But honestly, I do not know. I'm simply presenting those two as two possibilities, in my opinion.
Well, they're interesting possibilities, because on the one hand, that's the first thing I thought was like, well, he could be making it all up and be the psychopath himself. That was the first thing that came to mind before you said it. And then I thought, well, that is actually possible, because the backstory really is so extreme that it seems like something someone would make up to justify their hatred of women, their obvious hatred of women. And then I look at, his series of, The Truth About So-and-so that he does after people die. Who the fuck does that right after someone dies? A truth video about them. Like, you got to be missing something to do that, to make that like a thing that you do. Yeah. It's like I watched the Maya Angelou one part way through, and I was just like, I was utterly and completely horrified that every single one dehumanizes the person so utterly and completely that it's a classic smear campaign. And who does classic smear campaigns? And it's a post-mortem smear campaign, which makes it even more... can't even
answer,
even more disturbing, really.
Well, the only one of those Truth About videos where it was positive was Robin Williams, and he basically blamed everything on his, quote, gold digger ex-wife. That was why Robin Williams did all of these things, and that's why he killed himself. And if only these money grubbing women would stop with alimony payments, then men would all be better. It's kind of like,
right.
Jesus Christ, dude. Well, here's something interesting. Tom was sort of picking up on the, what if he's making this up? And again, I mean, I have no idea. And if it is true, I wouldn't. That doesn't excuse what he does, but that's a real trauma. But let's just think about how many cult-like people there are out there, particularly in the New Age movement, and people that are part of the sort of, people that talk a lot about MK Ultra and trauma-based mind control. There's a lot of people out there completely making up stories about satanic abuse, about all sorts of things, and people in the alt media pick up on it all the time. And I was just talking to Tom a little while ago before we were recording about this woman, which you might know, Kira, Teal Swan or Teal Scott or Teal Bosworth. She has different names. And she, for most, she's very popular in the more sort of new agey alt media. And I used to get her videos, again, would get recommended to me over and over again. So I'd watch them from time to time. And some of the stuff she says is interesting. But when you start piecing together what she's been saying and a timeline for when this was happening, it almost makes no sense. And a lot of people have called her out as being a liar. And I just find it so funny that people will pick up on that all the time. But with Molyneux, no way. It's never even an issue. Why would he lie about this? Because he's saving us, Don't you see? Like, after I defood, everything was better, and Steph is going to provide for me now. So I find it interesting that that's not even a topic of discussion, whereas so many other, it's like you can say something that somebody doesn't like, and suddenly you're a disinfo agent. You're being paid by the CIA to say this. Oh, you're just making this up for attention. But Molyneux totally gets a pass, and I don't know. Is that, I'm sure there's a variety of reasons, but that's an interesting idea that just sort of popped into my mind.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, as far as the satanic ritual abuse thing, your kid has more of a chance of getting struck by lightning twice in the same day than being satanic ritually abused. So the concern about it is a little bit over the top. And that's not, in any way to take away compassion for people who endure any type of abuse. But there's a simple solution, and that is educate yourself to grooming techniques and educate your children to grooming. And then guess what? If you take it to the next level, you get to see how cults groom in the very, very same way. And political organizations and all of grooming is all the same when it comes down to it. It's make you feel good about yourself so much that you're addicted to the way that particular cult-like leader makes you feel, that then you begin to follow their little thought train down to Crazy Town. And, and then you're arguing because Crazy Town makes you feel good, so you want people to join you there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there is... I think one of the things that Molyneux does particularly well is what it is that he promises people, and the way in which he does that, because his whole philosophy is kind of it's all encompassing. That apparently if you follow this set of rules that he's laid out, and you get rid of all of the involuntary relationships in your life, that you will get essentially freedom, that you will get happiness, and that you will get financial success. So he is, it's the three wishes that everyone basically, I suppose, in the West, I suppose everyone really kind of wants financial success of some sort, whatever that might mean in your, in your context. Everyone wants to have, stable food supply and things. So it's appealing to very, very basic things within people. It's appealing to the sorts of desires that almost everyone would have. And so he is tapping into something there it's in a very cunning way. And this is, again, it just reminds me so much of psychopathic and sociopathic behavior, of, being able to identify when you cut away a lot of the kind of airs and graces and the sophistication of civilization and all of that. When you cut all of that away, what's actually left? What do human beings still basically want? And if you promise to provide them these things, that they will, like you, basically, that they, like you say, they will become addicted to that feeling of, oh, things are going to be all right, and, this guy's going to help me, and my life's going to get better. Psychopaths are very good at that, because they live a very base life, if you like. They understand those kind of core survival instincts, possibly better than non-psychopaths do, because we have compassion and imagination and other things to sort of, we're more complex. We're not missing whatever it is that psychopaths are missing. And so, certainly his behaviours are psychopathic, but I'm still completely unsure whether that's because he's proto and he's aping this from something else, or whether that's because that's actually what he is. Either is a distinct possibility, and either way, I'm not sure if it really matters. You know what I mean? I'm not sure in terms of my advice to anyone and my response to this. I'm not sure it necessarily does matter. Right, and since we can't answer the question with any evidence because we don't have the evidence necessary, it's a bit of a moot point, maybe. But yeah, I'm not going to go around in that whole circle once more.
But any ideology that teaches you to leave your family behind is extraordinarily dangerous. I mean, your family is central to your life, and to take that away from you is to leave you unstable and leave you dependent on the cult leader. So that and that's always one of the steps in sucking you into the cult, is taking you away from your support system, your family, your friends, all the people that you're familiar with in your life, and then you have nobody to turn to except for the cult for what it means to be human.
And then if the cult turns on you, then what do you have? You have nothing. Right. And then you do get people who end up hurting themselves in very serious ways. And again, I mean, that's what's so dangerous about this guy, and it's not just Molyneux. There's a lot of that in the alt media, but understanding that is unfortunately people will make all sorts of excuses in their minds and to other people that this is fine, don't worry about it, But he's done so many good things,
Well, returning to Alex Jones and all the fear porn, and not just Alex Jones, but anyone who peddles this kind of relentless apocalyptic crap. People will excuse that. People will say, "Oh, but he's waking people up to whatever it is that he's supposedly waking people up to." And that whole mentality of, "I was this one thing that thought this one way about the world, and now I'm this other thing that has to think this other way about the world."
That in itself separates you from your family and your support system and support structure. The wackier it is, the more you are isolated from your support system. So they don't even have to outwardly say that that's what they're supporting, like Molyneux does, saying, with the DFU stuff. But just this super wacky ideology stuff that nobody in your family is going to spouting. Worried when you start spouting it, and then so it doesn't even have to be obvious like it is with Molyneux. So, say for instance, David Icke. We have to disable the moon, or what? I mean, what's going on? That's going to isolate you if you start talking weird stuff like that. Like, what does that mean? Yeah. What?
Or that the reptilians are controlling the Queen of England, and that's why the stock market crashed, and the chemtrails and 9/11. So once you go down that, yeah, exactly, then who the fuck is going to listen to you other than the people on David Icke's forum?
Yeah, so
they're only reinforcing what you've already made up your mind about.
Yeah, and so your social circle naturally becomes narrower. And then, again, this is, to me, it's all about identity. It's all about people's sense of identity, which is extremely, extremely important. It's one of the most important things that people have. And one of the most important things that I think makes human beings somewhat different to animals Because I don't think animals do have quite the same sense of individual identity that humans do, although I could, again, be completely wrong about that.
My cats do.
I knew you were going to insist that. But you know what I'm saying? Again, it's about, that I was once this thing. This was my identity. This is, and this was my family, and this is where I came from, and these are the friends that I either grew up with or made along the way, and, they turned me into this sort of a person and helped me become this kind of a person. And then you're supposed to ditch all that because your new, whatever, truther identity or libertarian identity or Marxist identity or zeitgeist or whatever it is, demands of you that you believe this. And that anyone who doesn't believe that is some kind of a problem. And whether, like you say, whether it's explicitly saying you should get rid of these people and get them out of your life, or whether it's just presenting you with the kind of belief and the kind of mentality that means that either people will stop associating with you because they think you've gone crazy, or just because you insist on having this kind of a conversation and that any other sort of a conversation isn't worth having. And let's face it, I'm sure we all have probably quite banal and stupid conversations with a lot of our friends, because part of life is just, shooting the shit and letting the world go by and having a good time. It doesn't all have to be about whatever the latest political issue is or whatever the latest political philosophical development is or talking about all of that. But there is very much this thing in the whole truth movement of, I hear this from people who get in touch with me on my podcast, and it infuriates the hell out of me, to be honest. When people tell me, I don't know how to talk to other people about this stuff. And part of me's thinking, why do you even have to? Why can't it just be part of your own journey of exploration and learning and self-discovery? What's wrong with it actually just being that? Why does it have to be something that then becomes something that you tell your friends about and you convince your friends that they need to get into this and get interested in this and have an opinion about this as well? And this is true, even well outside the truth movement. You have this almost ubiquitously in political discussion, right? You have those people who are just into politics, and whatever's the latest political news, they will have an opinion on it and they'll want to talk about it, and that's all they'll want to talk about. And they're incredibly annoying. Let's face it. They're not fun people to be around. They're not fun people to have a conversation with. And that's what it must be like for most people to talk to most kind of truthers or members of these other sorts of organizations and movements that we've been talking about. It must be really quite frustrating. And so I'm not surprised that a lot of people struggle to have conversations about these things because they're not approaching it like a conversation. They're not going out there and saying, I read something about this and I'm not sure what to make of it. And I'm kind of interested in this. Are you interested in this? That's how you have a conversation about something, right? Whereas they're not. They're going out there and saying, I learned this and I discovered this and this is a revelation about, and it's going to completely blow your mind and change the way you look at the world. And it's like, well, if you start a conversation like that, of course you're not going to get anywhere. So stop having that kind of a conversation about these things, because it's been going on for far too long. It's got absolutely nowhere. I just think maybe now it's had its testing period. Let's try something else. Let's try a different type of conversation about these topics. That's kind of fundamentally where I've been at for a number of years now, really.
Yeah, the gung-ho, the gung-ho aspect of, I really got in her face and, I really told her about, anarcho-capitalism.
Sucked it to her about Boston bombing, yeah.
Yeah, because I've had a few exchanges with some of the anarcho-capitalists that are really funny, and it's like these, 22-year-old guys who are schooling me, about anarcho-capitalism. It's like, do you realize you're talking to like a 45-year-old woman? Like, I could be your mother, so knock it off.
Yeah. Your mother doesn't listen to it, neither would I.
Very good.
Well, and those people, I don't even think they really care about the research. They don't care about understanding. They just care about, the secret hidden knowledge that you don't know about. That now they're not. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing about understanding why this goes on. It's only in that it does go on. There's no, puzzling out what this is really, what agenda it is, or why people are, do the whatever thing it is that you're talking about. It's merely the idea that you know it and someone else doesn't know it, and by telling, because when you do learn something new, you do endorphins are released. It is exciting, but that doesn't mean. But if you don't follow through with that, with actually thinking and using your brain, then it's pointless. Then you haven't really learned anything. You just learned a couple facts and dates, but that's it. You haven't really learned anything substantial.
Well, you just made a couple of wires in your brain go a bit buzzy for a while.
Right? Yeah.
And that, actually, I mean, I'm kind of being sarcastic and flippant when I say that, but I do actually think there's an element of truth to that. That there is, like when people first, go through a waking up process, and from my experience, the only people who ever go through that were people who were quite naive about the world to begin with. Like, I wasn't. I always thought that politics was massively corrupt, and so finding out that politics was massively corrupt wasn't exactly a waking up experience for me. It just confirmed what I already, what my parents had told me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it didn't come as a big shock, and therefore I didn't get that kind of really emotional experience of discovery that it seems that some people go through.
I got a more like a "see, I told you so" kind of moment than oh my God, things aren't as they seem moment. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I didn't have that same experience that it seems a lot of people had. And from what I've observed is that a lot of people become addicted to that. They become addicted to that feeling of learning something new, whether it's true or not, whether it matters or not, whether it's, anything. It's just what's the most exciting kind of out there idea that I can inflict on my mind to try and recapture that experience that I had the first time when I actually did discover something that maybe was true and did matter and did make me think differently about the world. They become addicted to that mental process in just the same way as drug addicts do, in just the same way as drug addicts are quite often chasing that high that they first got when they were 18. But they'll never get it again because their brain will never be like it was when they were 18 again. They will have always become, a little bit more tolerant to the drug or whatever, and therefore it doesn't have that same impact and doesn't give them that same rush. And so, as a result, they just keep chasing something they can never actually get. And I think it's exactly the same with a lot of truthers. That they're just trying to find the most wacky, batshit out there stuff that they can, because that's the only thing that gets them excited anymore, if you like.
Well, that's how you get into aliens. That's how you get into Ancient Aliens and the Anunnaki and, HARP and all of these things. And it's not that that aliens don't exist somewhere, but when ancient people are incapable of building something complicated, that they needed aliens to do it. But at the same time, Western philosophers are who we should look up to. Give me a break. I mean, it's so silly, and it just, you need to keep, as you were saying, Tom, like feeding that rush. So yeah, you get into the most batshit crazy stuff,
which is an obvious. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no. I mean, it was just that it, and then and then you can fall down the line of Hitler was a great guy, because at that point you've already gone completely insane. You can be made to think that Hitler is good because he was fighting the ancient aliens that were coming in order to bring about the Zionist takeover of the Federal Reserve. So okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And this is actually what you get with a lot of this kind of stuff, is like the more different conspiratorial angles you can cram into one theory, the more exciting the theory is, and the more sort of, therefore the more plausible or whatever it is.
Get the Jesuits in there somewhere.
Yeah, crowbar all in there.
Yeah, and the
Jesuit and Anunnaki, whatever, yeah.
And it all went down at Pumapunku, But if you have to cram as many different types of religions and spiritual teachings as possible into one theory as well, and that's, I think, really the sign that there's maybe some sort of psyop to it, or CIA backing or something like that, because it's like, wait a minute, this must be one of those going down the wrong road type of things. But I love to watch stuff like Ancient Aliens, because it's hilarious to see the way they just like pervert native teachings and stuff. Like, I mean, it's really sad, but it's also hilarious at the same time, because it's it's out there. It's good stuff.
Go on, Pierce.
I was going to say, I mean, it's like, ancient aliens must have built Machu Picchu, but not, Stonehenge or something like, they'll always come up with it's always ancient non-white people that had to have been influenced by the aliens.
Well,
but
that's what I was going to say.
The great white people, yeah, they're capable of building anything.
Is that notion that it's always ancient brown people? There is always this implicit racism that, because they were brown and they lived 4,000 years ago, that means they can't have built anything. And I'm sort of wondering, well, isn't that just a massive kind of, not even Western myth, it's just a sort of myth of modern civilization that we seem to think that no one was capable of greatness before us.
Yeah, and we have all the factual...
Or greatness that could even exceed ours of present times. That this architecture could actually... Go on, sorry. We
have all the factual evidence that we need to prove that it was human beings that built the mounds, for instance. That was human hands that built miles and miles and miles of mounds across America. We that's a fact. There's absolutely nothing that points to aliens anywhere. In that whole. So, and you're right, it is always this sort of ancient brown people that, it must have been aliens, because they sure couldn't have done stuff like that. And, it doesn't...
I'm sorry.
And it doesn't, it doesn't all these ancient civilizations were doing the same thing at the same time, and there's no sort of look at, maybe it's the collective unconscious, maybe there was contact, maybe that whole Bering Strait thing is a myth, and maybe, it's the old thing of let's look at what we know and make our conclusions from that, instead of having a conclusion and then, try to fit what we do know into that around that conclusion that you've already made.
Well, a lot of this involves the kind of God of the gaps logic, that because we don't know why ancient peoples did this, we know that, or relatively well, like you say, there's a relatively strong evidence line that this was just human activity, but we don't know why they were doing it. It's a bit of a mystery to us. Because, of course, we're talking about thousands of years ago. How would we expect to know the motivations and reasons and rationales behind what people did thousands of years ago? It's like trying to project 5,000 years into the future and say, what will the human motivations be for building something? I mean, it's not the sort of question that there's ever going to be a straightforward and ready answer to. And because there's that gap, and because there's that question that we actually just sort of don't know, therefore aliens, or therefore, Illuminati, or therefore whatever. And so, it's the God of the gaps logic. It's because we don't have a complete argument and a complete explanation, we can therefore just inject into that gap whatever our agenda and preconceived conclusion is. And that's something that happens, that's very, very common in conspiratorial thinking.
Ancient astronaut theorists say yes. That's all you have to say after whatever wild statement that you make. That's it. Ancient astronaut theorists, they say yes, so it's science.
Of a sort.
And the amount of like CIA people that push the aliens crap, you would think would dissuade people from just buying it up, but instead they just, and if anything, they somehow justify that these CIA guys they're letting us in on the truth. I mean, why would they lie about Roswell? This is so big, this is earth shattering. They couldn't lie, or else they'd all be killed by the aliens. They were the aliens would beam down the reptilians and kill them if they were saying this. So again, they'll justify it no matter what it is. And I was just going to quickly say, if it's not ancient aliens, it's always some ancient tribe of white Indians, which, no one can prove existed. Oh, they're the ones that built everything in America.
Yeah. Right. Wacky stuff, huh? It's I'm noticing that we have like a half hour left, and we were going to bring the Moonies into this. I know that, Pearse, you've been doing some research, and I certainly want to fit them in because I'm interested in what you have uncovered.
Sure. Well, I guess I am interested in cults and how the intelligence services use them, and I think the Moonies are like point in case. I mean, the CIA was using them forever. It was recently revealed that they were actually using them to run Radio Free Asia in the 60s. But the Moonies have like a weird sort of crossover with the alternative media in a variety of ways that's really odd, and again, something that I think people would, if they really realize this, would be like, whoa, what the hell? But for instance, like the Moonies helped, along with the Coors family, create the most like secretive, dangerous, horrifying neoconservative think tank on the planet, the Council for National Policy. And various members within the CNP were financial supporters of a whole mess of groups. But one guy in particular, who again was fairly close with the Moonies, this guy Richard Schaff, who was a board member of CNP, was a financial supporter of this weird group called High Frontier, which was obsessed with Reagan's Star Wars program and was obsessed that nuclear war was going to be imminent. And this appealed. They were allied with the Church Universal and Triumvirate, which is a pretty famous cult that still exists, although the numbers are much smaller now. And that was headed by Mark and Elizabeth Prophet. Now, they're really interesting because Elizabeth Prophet in the 80s hosted lots of dialogues in front of her cult members with Anthony Sutton, who is a huge deal in the alternative media, and everyone is always quoting Anthony Sutton's work on Hitler and the rise of Wall Street and the rise of Hitler, or Wall Street and the rise of the Bolsheviks, all these things. But this guy was super into, had seemingly no problem with talking in front of a dangerous, destructive cult that was obsessed with nuclear war and would have these Star Wars group, CNP aligned people come and speak at their meetings. And that just got me to sort of thinking more broadly what is going on with cults like the Church Universal and Triumphant, the Moonies, and what is the fascination that they have with certain factors or sections of the alternative media. And I'm not sure really where that all goes, but I will just say that the Anthony Sutton one is really fascinating because this guy that supposedly revealed all of the secret doings of Wall Street in building up the Bolsheviks and Nazi Germany, he discovered all these secret groups and secret societies, either didn't care that he was talking in front of a destructive cult, or didn't know that they were a destructive cult, which is even sadder and lamer. But yeah, that's just one of many weird things. But people will also be familiar with the Moonies and the sort of overall. I mean, a lot of people in the alternative media point to a very famous series of articles in the Washington Times that outed some sort of homosexual prostitution ring that was operating inside the White House. Now, who owns the Washington Times are the Unification Church, the Moonies. So again, that's not to say that it didn't happen. I think it did. But again, we should maybe take a step back and wonder, well, why would the Moonies, who run this newspaper, want to expose people who, for all intents and purposes, are big supporters of the Unification Church, like Bush and Reagan, all of these people, everyone in Washington on the far right, neocons love the Moonies, and they use them over and over again, and they use the power of their members to get them to vote for them. But why would the Moonies kind of sell out one of their own is a really interesting thing, and I'm not sure if people don't seem to be aware. I brought up the Anthony Sutton thing, and people are like, oh, whatever, who cares? He spoke in front of some weird apocalyptic cult where, they did horrible things to their members and, built these crazy bomb shelters and made their members spend all this money so that the nuclear holocaust wouldn't annihilate them and that, they would save the world afterwards. But so that's like a lot of information. I know we don't have too much time left there, but I guess both of those things, the CUT, the Moonies, and this sort of crossover into the alternative media is really fascinating to me, and is something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. And I think that in those cases, those are more sort of overt, serious programs being run by some intelligence service or some faction of them. But that basically just gets me to thinking more and more about things like Stefan Molyneux and some of the other cults that we see popping up in the alternative media. And that just sort of gets me to thinking that there's nothing new about this. You know, it's not like a new phenomenon that there's cults or gurus within the alt media. This has been going on for a while. And what's that about? What's going on there? And again, you know, it's not enough to be like, oh yeah, here this happened. You know, the CUT was sponsoring Anthony Sutton to come and speak. You know, that's great that you know that fact, but maybe now let's try and figure out why that's going on and what does that mean, and then what's the implication of that going forward right now. You know, and maybe now we should really be weary of these cult-like people that are popping up within the alternative media, because God only knows some of them must be part of some grander scheme to destroy movements, to discredit movements. And I wonder if you get Anthony Sutton talking in front of all of these cult members, then who the hell is going to believe him, even if he does have something interesting to say? So, and that seems to be at least one of the goals of the intelligence services in using a lot of these cults. And then other times, things like the Moonies, they're just using them because they're extremely powerful. It's a massive group. You've got a lot of people that are willing to do anything for the Reverend Moon. So yeah, you can make them, you know, assassinate people and whatnot. But so I don't know if either of you guys want to pick up on it. I know we don't have a lot of time to get into all that.
Well, it's certainly these type of connections that we find point to the illusion that there's this two-party system, and you know they're totally separate and they're fighting each other, and it's like, no, just for the little people. And you know that's why the people who get so into it and are just like, you know, arguing that belief package, and this is why, and that's why they're so annoying, because you know at some point you realize with the kind of information that you're talking about and these big national policy organizations, they're filled with the people who are pulling the strings, and the whole left-right dynamic is just something that they use to further their power. Not that there's, you know, really sort of a ideology that they're that there's a real ideological, you know, struggle going on there.
Well, we talked about this last time, Kira. I mean, that's this, you know, why is Fletcher Prouty so involved in Scientology? You know, this man who's supposed to be telling us the truth about so many different aspects, and then he goes and works for this horrifying cult that kills people and makes women have abortions. I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, who's really running the show? And on that same line, there's a character who's is fairly well known in the alternative media, this guy Mark Lane, and he was the first person to write the like sort of big successful book that challenged the Warren Commission. And this guy was a big deal in the 60s. He was sort of everywhere, and he was considered one of these, you know, sort of trailblazers in JFK trutherism or whatever. Then he later went on to defend James Earl Ray, who was accused of killing Martin Luther King, and probably was either a patsy or was involved in some much larger scheme. But he again kind of came out and sort of came up with the official conspiracy theory the same way that he did with JFK, he did with James Earl Ray and Martin Luther King. And then later, where does he turn up? As the lawyer for Jim Jones's People's Temple. So again, these alternative media characters pop up over and over again in the weirdest places, and this guy that claimed that, oh yeah, it was, you know, Pentagon and whatever killed JFK. Then he's going and defending a CIA asset, Jim Jones, and defending everything that the People's Temple was doing, while at the same time maligning people like Mae Brussell, who was really, just phenomenal alternative researcher, and she should be much more well known. But was criticized constantly by Mark Lane. So again, it just these alternative figures, they pop up in the weirdest places, and they also they pop up in these sort of cult like groups, and then in real cults. And Mark Lane definitely promoted himself like this guru that no matter that anyone that wrote a different book about how JFK was killed was a disinfo agent or was evil. They were getting paid money from the CIA to do this, and only his book was the gospel. So yeah, I guess that's just a good historical thing to think about when we're talking about Molyneux and some of these other people, is that there's nothing new here. They've always existed. And they manage to float around in the same circles that many of us are in. And it's very easy to get roped into what they're saying and not even realize that you're being controlled by a cult leader. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on all that.
Tom?
Well, I mean, what I was thinking when I've been talking to Pearse about some of this stuff is that you're right. They don't seem to have an ideology that they are loyal to. What they seem to have figured out is that ideologies are extremely powerful and effective if deployed in the right time and place, if you like. That it's not really about ideology as a grand historical thing, that it should always be applied in the same way everywhere. But that if you apply a certain ideology in a particular time and space, it will have a particular effect. And the same ideology in a different time and space will do something quite different. And getting your head around that is something that I think is perhaps one of the keys to power. And that's actually what powerful people, truly powerful people, have twigged, is that loyalty to any of these ideologies is a nonsense. It's more about how do you use them to your advantage. And so what I wonder with some of this is whether the point is to sort of drive the truth movement, drive the alternative media towards certain extremes, utopias of the left and the right, to be fair. We see both. We really do. Because they know that they will operate in this way that we've been outlining. They will operate as a mechanism of escape for people. They will operate as a place where people will flee to and make themselves politically irrelevant. Because if you're, I'm being brutally honest here, if you're part of Stefan Molyneux's organisation, or if you're part of quite a lot of these sorts of movements, you have no political power. You have no political relevance, or you have as much political relevance as if your only activity is voting, So I think they want people to do that. So, obviously for mainstream people, they want you to vote for a mainstream party, and that's it. And if they can force you down that road and make you think that's being politically active, then they will do that, and thus it's a way of making you actually politically irrelevant. But for people who reject voting and reject that basic mainstream, whatever, left-right or two-party, three-party system, whatever you have, they want you to make yourself irrelevant in a different way, to make yourself powerless in a different way. Because if you can get people to disempower themselves, then you don't have to turn up with the army and start shooting them and things. And they don't. I mean, they're perfectly happy to do that when necessary, but they'd rather not do it all the time if they could avoid it. And so you come up with things like this. You come up with, let's invent spaces for people to escape to thus disempower themselves and make themselves unimportant to the political system. And so I wonder, with some of what you've been outlining there, Pearse, whether that was the sort of idea behind that operation, was that if you can, if you can push this thing to the absolute fringes, then it won't destroy itself, it won't just go away, but it'll make itself kind of unimportant to us. It'll make itself powerless. Because the more you make radical movements powerless by refusing to have anything to do with the system and just sort of trying to escape and reject it entirely, the more those radical movements become so radical that they don't matter anymore.
Well, I mean, that's sort of along those lines. I think that's part of what the People's Temple was about, and whatever Jonestown was about, was taking people that were socially conscious, that did actually have strong views about race relations and all sorts of other things, and then basically making them into these sort of mindless automatons that, all they did was just work for Jim Jones. They weren't really out there in the street doing anything. And then, that culminated in this horrific mass murder out in the jungle of Guyana. And then that's it. And then boom, we get Reagan in the 80s and, Iran-Contra and all these horrifying things. So, that was a great way to sort of derail and destroy that whole movement, and I'm sure they certainly encouraged that. And again, I mean, with things like, Anthony Sutton and these others, I mean, people that were adhering to everything that Anthony Sutton said, and then suddenly he's speaking in an interview with Elizabeth Prophet. Oh, who's Elizabeth Prophet? Maybe I'll get interested in that, and maybe, this sort of out there weird religion that maybe that's offering up the sort of answer for me, and then suddenly you're no longer really looking at what people like Sutton and others are saying. You're not interested in alternative research. Now you're interested in helping Elizabeth Prophet build bomb shelters out in rural, like, North Dakota, and then that's it. And you're no longer really interested. And I think they love that, and cults are so great. You don't have to do a lot to get people into that in a cult, and you can and if you have a whole bunch of them operating, then that's great, because more and more people will get involved, and then the people that you do want to control that are involved in mainstream politics, that's fine. They're easily manipulated. And then more so, like with something like the Moonies, it's very easy to get the head of the Unification Church to tell his followers vote for a certain candidate, and then boom, they've got it. That's it. So it works both ways. You can completely make them irrelevant, and you could make them somewhat relevant in an election if you have to. So yeah.
Well, I mean, where possible, co-opt the thing and try and make it part of the existing mechanism. But there will always be people who reject that. There will always be people looking to escape that. So what will they escape to? Because people who escape to, building their own self-sufficient farm or something, good luck to them. Great, by all means. But not very many people do that. Far fewer people do that than, join the Scientologists or something. So they're much more in favor of people, escaping to a place that doesn't either threaten the system or actually represent an escape from it. Because for those people who actually genuinely manage to escape from it, I think they'd rather people didn't, but ultimately it's more hassle than it's worth, I suppose, given the scale on which it's happening, for them to really counter that in any massive way. And I suppose once people have fled and got off the grid, most of those people have gone to another country anyway, because that's kind of the only way to escape the Western system, is to not be in the West. But you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
That it's from their perspective, they're gauging the threat of these things and seeing what way can we either make this useful to us or just so useless to those people that they end up, running around in circles and wasting all their time and resources, like you say, building bomb shelters or crazy churches or something, rather than actually building something, for themselves and their families and their people around them. So, yeah, cults replace that. They replace that sense of, and that movement towards local, self-sufficient community, in as much as that's possible. It's obviously quite a difficult thing to do in an absolute sense. But you know what I mean? A lot of people want that. A lot of people are driven towards that. But if you can divert that and turn that into, oh, no, don't get together with your local community and develop a farm. No, build a bomb shelter and be terrified of the Russians or whatever the hell it is that you're supposed to believe in. Because then, they can sell you some bomb shelter equipment, if nothing else, and all of that. Or you can buy one off Alex Jones or something. Yeah. So, it just makes you ultimately feed back into the system. Or make yourself so irrelevant to the system that you're no longer in any way a threat to it. One or the other.
Well, that's like a lot of the sort of ideas that the Roman, the Roman Empire, the Roman dictators used Christianity in order to pacify an entire empire. That by promoting this cult, it was a cult at that point,
as well as being
everybody.
quite a sort of radical slave revolt movement as well, something that could have actually threatened the system. Yeah,
exactly right. And taking out that and instead all turn the other cheek, blah blah blah. Yeah, get fed to the lions. That's okay. Resolved, sins have been resolved, and then you completely pacify this massive slave population that could have overthrown the Roman Empire. Obviously, there were more, people that were being subjugated than people that were flourishing under this disgusting empire. So, so why not spread this, love and peace, and it's all okay because it's all part of God's plan. That's why you're a slave and that you get beaten and all these other things. That's part of God's great plan for you, and it'll be wonderful when you are beat to death by your owner, because then you'll go to heaven and it's all fun. Provided you're baptized, because if you're not, then sorry, you're going to go to purgatory for the rest of your life. But I think that's, again, I mean, this goes all the way back, and you could definitely, I'm sure there were people that were into, obviously there wasn't an alternative media during the, Roman dictatorship, but there was certainly an alternative crowd. There were people that understood that this empire based around these dictators that were sort of given this right by the ancient gods, that's bullshit. But soon they got co-opted by some other radical thinker that was preaching that, this guy Jesus, in a place you've probably never heard of, thousands and thousands of miles away, if you follow everything he says and everything that his guru teachers say, then everything will be fine and it'll be great. And you don't really have to worry so much about the Romans, because this is way better. Just concern yourself with this. And not that this is one and one and the same, but then boom, then you get the Roman Catholic Church and a bunch of pedos running these horrible things all over the place. So so then this has always existed.
Yeah, and so then you run away from the Catholic Church and then you find yourself in a flying saucer cult, believing in aliens, or reading Zecharia Sitchin and thinking that that it has value when it was probably some sort of CIA funded operation, and it's like it's Christianity 2.0, the alien thing, because aliens came down and they messed up our DNA, so whatever failings are due to that. Whatever human failings we have are due to the fact that our DNA has been jacked up by the aliens.
Well, and it's the same kind of messianic cult, because the ultimate answer to this is presumably the aliens coming back at some point. So we've all got to keep, we've got to keep watching the skies in case the aliens come back at any point. In just the same way as Christianity believes in the return of the Messiah and Judgment Day and all the rest of this. That that there will be this arrival from outside that will somehow change everything. It's the exact same thing in the UFO cults.
Yeah,
it's the exact same thing. It's bizarre how similar they are, yet how virtually no one within either of those organizations would ever admit to the other one being so similar to them.
Right.
Well, the whole Nation of Islam is based around this flying saucer that crash landed in Japan. And if anyone told, if you were to approach a Nation of Islam mosque or something, they're not going to tell you that right off the bat. No, this is about the Muslim faith and blah 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 and all these other things, and don't really look so much at what Elijah Muhammad did or all these other things, and then suddenly boom, they throw you and we believe in this giant metal saucer that crash landed in Japan, whatever, thousands of years ago. And, that's the mothership that we all have to return to. Oh, and by the way, we also offer Dianetics courses and auditing. That's another thing they don't, the Nation of Islam is the only outside entity that is allowed to practice Scientology's teachings. So think about that. Anybody listening that's in the Nation of Islam. And that's probably what got Malcolm X murdered, was when he started saying that this was bullshit and that they believed in a flying saucer cult. So then, they took him out right away.
Right. Yeah. So any last words? We've got one more minute. That's some heavy stuff to leave him with.
Well done, Pearse. Well done.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
I always try to do that. Yeah.
Well, it ensures you'll be invited back, because we'll have to talk some more about this stuff. I did want to leave it with the thought of the algorithms, to just go back to that. And, for myself, I've sort of liked to really look at the stuff I'm being offered, and, what I'm putting out there versus what is coming back to me, and the algorithms in social media. And, so that might be an interesting thing for all of us to do, is just sort of look at it. Because I really think that this is one big, massive experiment, the whole social media thing. I mean, if Google has this recognized CIA connection, they could be running some really massive experiments in social media with all that they have. So check yourselves, I guess, would be the don't get too up in arms or anybody's face or anything like that. Just observe and then talk.
And don't be afraid to speak out either.
Yeah, but observe
There's
first.
nothing...
Don't just
Yeah.
Because they want to know what your emotional response is to the information presented. So don't give it to them. That's my best advice. Thank you guys so much for coming back, and we'll definitely have you back. I love to talk to both of you. And thanks everybody for listening. We're going to kick it off with a victory song.